and welcome to today's webinar, which is being held as part of the Urbact Health and Green Space project. Health and Green Space is an EU-funded project which aims to make urban parks and green spaces more conducive to good health. And this is done through environmental enhancements and animation programs which get people more active and more engaged with their neighbours. Limerick is one of 8 partner cities from around Europe who are working together and learning from each other to develop plans for the green spaces in their city. My name's Anne Goggin. I work in the Physical Development Directorate of Limerick City and County Council, and I'm joined today by my colleague Sarah O'Malley, who works with our stakeholders on the Health and Green Space project. The topic of today's webinar is natural and inclusive play spaces, and our speakers today are psychologist Dr. David Coleman, who works extensively with young people and who I'm sure will be well known to many of you from his appearances on programs such as 21st Century Child, Families in Trouble and Teens in the Wild. Our second speaker is Laurence Colleran, who is a landscape architect with South Dublin County Council and the driving force behind the delivery of over 30 natural and inclusive play spaces in South County Dublin. So with that, I'll hand over to David.
And thank you very much for that introduction. And actually, thank you, I suppose, most especially for the invitation to be here. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't been invited. And I just want to congratulate you on, the initiative, even I think looking at inclusive and natural play spaces is such an important thing. I'm not sure how many of those of you who are tuned in might know me, but as Anne said, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work with children and teenagers. I was going to say all day, every day, but thankfully I do get a break from that at some times. So I also live, I mean, I'm not, under other circumstances, if it wasn't COVID-19, I would probably be there in person, delighted at the fact that I only had a short journey because I live in Agunla, just outside Killaloe. And my kids were very lucky in as much as they got to go to Raheenwood Steiner National School, which again, I don't know how many of you will be familiar with it, but their experience, certainly in kindergarten, but even throughout the whole school, was that their whole environment was natural. It is literally in a woodland. And so I was always very taken and very conscious of the fact that when they were playing, at school, and certainly kindergarten was all play-based for the first 3 years, they really were out in this wonderful environment where their imaginations could just run riot. I mean, there were a few downsides, they would come back home literally covered in mud, having been climbing trees and playing in mud pits and all the other usual things that we do when left to our own devices in natural play spaces. But certainly my experience with children is that in the first kind of 7 years of their lives, they really are exploring and coming to understand their world through their bodies. So it's their interaction with other people, with other children, their interaction with their environment, their interaction with objects in that environment. So that's why you see small children, they run, they climb, they pull, they poke, they prod, they manipulate, they taste. And that's how they come to know their world. And so I'm going to share just a few slides with you in terms of just understanding a little bit more about play. But really, I think, over the last number of years, it's almost like we've become a little bit afraid of letting children play. Some of that is to do with the environment that we live in. I think, there are lots of us who, we look at small children, we look at where we live, we think, oh my God, it's just not as safe as it used to be. We all have maybe memories of halcyon days when we were growing up where, we had huge freedoms. I mean, I lived in County Kildare for a period of my childhood, and it was rural, and so we had opportunities to literally just be out in the fields, down at the river, for hours and hours and hours. You'd leave in the morning and there'd be a kind of a casual understanding that you'd be back for food at some stage, but there was no necessarily strict time limit set. There was no checking in or checking up. We were literally just gone for the day, and got up to all sorts of, when I think of it now, quite dangerous things. I lived not far from the River Liffey, And so we would go to the Liffey, and there was a weir near where we lived, and that was the congregation space for all the children and teenagers in the area, and on good summer days. And you go swimming just above the weir, and you know, and then you go sliding down the weir, and you go jumping through the salmon pools. So yeah, I mean, you know, kind of dangerous stuff, all unsupervised by adults. And yet, I think as a learning opportunity, you know, in so many different areas, as I'll discuss now, it really was, yeah, just a real joy and a real opportunity, in a way that I'm not sure that we have now. So just excuse me for 1 sec while I move my eyeline, while I just share my screen with you, because I do want to just have a look at a few different slides. So the first thing I suppose that we need to do is just to consider what play is. And so here's a definition for you, you know, if a definition is helpful, but play really is the work of children. It consists of those activities that they perform for their own amusement. So I suppose the key thing is that it has reward for them, you know, it's intrinsically rewarding. They enjoy it, and it has to feel like something that they want to do themselves. They don't need to be told how to play or what to play. And so as a consequence, then it has a reward for them in terms of their behavioral development, their social development, and their physical development. And part of the reason why that's the case is if we look at how we can understand children, we can see that there are kind of 4 key elements to any child. There's the way that they behave. So their actions, there are their thoughts, there are their physical selves, and there are their feelings. And those 4 key elements are all interlinked and interwoven, very much like the cogs in a gearing system, if you've ever seen cogs in a gearing system. So that's where you have a wheel with teeth, it merges with another wheel with teeth, and as one wheel turns, it forces the other to turn as well. And so we know, you know, for children then, that if they're thinking in a particular kind of way, then they might act subsequent to that thinking. What they do in terms of their actions could have an impact on their physical selves and their feelings. And all too often these days, certainly, I think most of us have a sense that, you know, technology is just ever encroaching on children's lives. And because of that, then they're becoming perhaps more sedentary. They're just spending more and more times in their room. They're located on a device as opposed to in any kind of a natural environment or outside. You know, their social activity, certainly during COVID-19, was hugely interrupted. And so again, technology played, you know, an important, but again, you know, we have to wonder, was it really a healthy role in terms of how they were able to connect with their friends? And so if you get into a habit of being very sedentary and not really moving, not really doing things, playing a lot of computer games as a child, then that's going to affect how you're going to feel, how you're thinking. And it's also going to restrict your environment down. You know, we know how we think, feel, and act can change depending on the environment. And so, again, you know, if you have, even as an adult, you know, a sense of feeling overwhelmed and really stressed and tired, you know, we often recommend to people, look, just get outdoors, go for a walk. And when we do go for a walk and we feel the fresh air, and if we're lucky enough to have, you know, any bit of nice view during that walk, or even just the sound of nature, of you know, the breeze blowing through trees, or it might be that we have a bit of a view of water if we're lucky, you know, those kinds of things tend to be refreshing and energizing for most of us. And so, yeah, the environment that we're in is really important, and that's certainly the case also for children in terms of their play. I want to just look, if you can bear with me for a few minutes, at the various benefits that play can bring for children, because again, you know, I'm going to look at these in terms of those 4 key areas. So physically, cognitively, behaviorally, and in terms of children's physical development. So if we go back to this idea that, you know, play is the work of children, it's almost like this is what they're built to do, and this is how they're going to learn about their world. Well, we can see naturally that if a child has an opportunity to run, to climb, to jump, all those different kinds of things, it's going to influence the development of their, what we call gross motor skills. So jumping, climbing are all about the big movements of arms and legs and so on. There are also the fine movements. So if you have a child who's playing and they're playing with something like Lego, for example, well, then that involves fine motor control. So that's all about the fingers and the fine, you know, gentle movements that we'll make with small movements with our fingers and so on. And so that's really important. You know, all too often now, even in terms of early childhood education, early childhood education in Ireland, to my mind, is shifting away from a focus on children's natural development to quite an academic focus on learning the 3 R's as early as possible. And so, children are being encouraged to hold pencils and that fine motor grip of a pencil at ridiculously early ages, when in fact, children don't need to read and write until they're 6 or 7. Plenty of time to be learning that kind of stuff at that age. And so when they're 3 and 4 in early childhood settings, all the better for them to be just outdoors, because then they're getting the benefits of the fresh air, then they're getting the benefits of all the natural opportunities to develop their fine motor and their gross motor skills. We also know for children, obviously they are not physically, but they're cognitive, they're learning things, they're gaining knowledge about their environment, they're gaining knowledge about their capacity, their capability. So they know, for example, they learn how to judge distance as they try to jump over a puddle and then they land in the puddle. Or maybe they're deliberately trying to land in the puddle and they're enjoying the fact that as they land in the puddle, the water sprays out. And so they get to see the distance. How far does the water spray out? If I jump higher into the same puddle, does the water go further? So these are all things that children are learning. We might think, oh my God, they're just messing, they're getting themselves filthy, they're creating havoc. And actually, in truth, they're really learning about themselves, but they're also critically learning about, in this case, physics and the properties of water and the properties of movement and how water will move. That said, I'm a parent of 3 children now. My youngest is 16, so we've moved past the stage of playgrounds and play spaces for them. But I can certainly remember one experience, which was not long after Anne had alluded to the fact that I used to be on TV, and so it wasn't long after I was on TV, and so had become slightly better known. And we were up in Dublin and walking through a car park, and it was an old car park, and so there were lots of big puddles, and there were various other people around, and I was with my whole family, and but we had split into 2 groups, so my wife was behind with our youngest, and I was ahead with our older 2. And we were walking anyway through this car park, and my youngest son decided that these puddles were just far too attractive to just simply pass by. Why would you pass by a good puddle when you can jump into it and watch the water fly? And of course, his mum was remonstrating with him that he wasn't wearing his wellies, and this wasn't back at kindergarten, and this wasn't the time for it, and we needed to go. And of course, he was kicking a big fuss. And so there was a fine old schmozzle beginning to happen behind me. So I took one little look behind and thought, that's not going to reflect well on me. So I thought I'd keep walking with my older 2. And so my poor wife was left to deal with my youngest, who was going slightly nuts about the fact that he wasn't allowed to jump. However, that knowledge that he was gaining was more than just simply the fact that he was going to get wet, even in that situation. I should say I did eventually obviously go back and realize that I needed to support my wife in what was happening. It would have been tempting to keep going, but such is the way of life. So the other thing, of course, it's listed there, they get opportunity to solve problems, make decisions, will I climb up here? What will happen? Why can't I get through this space? What do we need to stop the water flowing? What works as a good dam? So if I pack mud, what happens? The water tends to, kind of dissolve the mud away. So I need something a little bit firmer. I need to use stones or sticks to back up the mud. These are all things that children are doing when they're in natural play spaces that allow them then to make decisions and to solve problems, and they're probably talking to their friends and they're saying, get this, get that, get the other, and so all those things are helping them with their cognitive development. A few other benefits, both looking in terms of the behavioral and then the emotional benefits for children. And so we know that, again, in terms of some of the key behavioral things, they're learning their social skills. So they're learning how to be assertive, they're learning how to take turns, they're learning about sharing things, about teamwork, but also importantly about, understanding social cues. So if you create an imaginative game with your friend, and interesting, I was just chatting with Anne and Sarah and Laurence before the seminar began, and Laurence was talking about oh my goodness, I completely lost my train of thought. Okay, don't worry about that. It was something to do with children and teamwork. Anyway, Laurence will probably remember what it was that we were talking about. Anyway, the other thing that children learn in terms of behaviors is they learn about their moral development. So they learn about what's right and wrong, and kindness and self-regulation. And so as they're discussing with each other, you know, what to do. Oh, that's what it was. It was about the different games that children would play. And Laurence was making the point that when children are playing in tarmac covered areas, you know, the games tend to be all about chasing and so on. And when they move into areas which are, you know, grass based or sand or whatever, the games become much more creative. And so in that creativity, then you learn about, you know, the reactions of other children, and you learn to pick up those social cues. So, you know, when you play an imaginary game, a make-believe game, you know, then you're really learning to play with all this kind of social nuance. And so that's really, really good for children. Again, in terms of emotions, so when children play, you know, often they get frustrated, they get disappointed. And so those are real opportunities for them to become aware of their own feelings, and also aware of the feelings of others. So again, if you're trying to play a game with somebody else and they're getting annoyed about something, then you're learning something about their feelings too. And so you can learn about empathy and how you might need to change something about what you're doing or what you're saying to support somebody else to feel a little bit better. So, I mean, you know, the benefits of play, just, you know, they're innumerable, really. I mean, this is a very brief, because unfortunately, I only have a very short time this morning to be with you, and I have to apologize as well. I'm not even going to be here at the end of this morning's seminar for the questions and answers. So apologies for that too. I think you really are going to enjoy, you know, Laurence's presentation, because I think it really is eye-opening in terms of just the benefit for kids, not just in terms of play, but also then beyond that in terms of natural play spaces and green space. They are really so important for children. Just before I go though, the one thing I do want to mention is just a little bit about, I already touched on it, the idea that we've been sanitizing play for children for a long time because we fear some of the risks that they may expose themselves to. And so sometimes that risk might be literally that they're going to climb too high, they're going to fall, and they're going to injure themselves. Sometimes it may be that, you know, they're going to an area that itself is intrinsically unsafe. Or we worry that there will be other kids there, for example, who might be, you know, kind of bullying them or whatever it might be. And so there are lots of risks that we perceive for our children. And of course, as a parent, you want to minimize risk. It's, you know, and yet if we over sanitize things, if we eliminate too much risk for children, the way we'll do it, as this slide suggests, is that we'll either, you know, reduce the amount of physical play that we let them do, or we'll reduce the opportunity for them to choose what it is that they want to do. And so children are quite good at judging the level of risk that they feel comfortable with. We all have a kind of a risk tolerance, what we're comfortable with, and children will only learn their own risk tolerance when they have opportunities to put themselves into risky situations and then learn from the consequences of being in those situations. And so we can see, you know, the research quite clearly shows us that when we take away opportunities for children to explore some element of risk, it's really likely that they're going to either have underdeveloped motor skills, poor physical health, they're going to have bad risk judgment, and they're going to actually have increased injuries. So it's really in our interest to let kids be kids and let kids be out there trying, experimenting, and having fun out in these natural environments. I think, you know, it's always, I think, tempting, you know, to try and kind of hold kids back. But actually, the more we let them out there and the more we just give them those opportunities to be themselves with other kids, to run, to jump, you know, the better for them. So as I say, apologies that my time is slightly short this morning. But again, I just want to congratulate Limerick County Council on their initiatives. I know already, having been up with South Dublin County Council and with Laurence, as I say, I think you're really going to enjoy his presentation. And you know, the evidence is so clear in terms of the benefits for kids that that it's great that Limerick County Council are really looking at creating these natural and inclusive play spaces for kids. So with that, I'll hand you back to Anne, and thank you all very much, and the best of luck with the rest of the webinar.
Thanks very much, David. Thanks for that very vivid and convincing picture of the importance of play for children. And I suppose, like, emphasizing the importance of it from a developmental point of view, of letting them engage in this creative, unstructured play. I think as parents, we feel we're not being good parents if we're not controlling the situation, getting involved. But I suppose the takeaway message for me there was just provide them the opportunities, let them get on with it, and even if it means the odd grazed knee, so be it. But thank you very much, and I know you're busy this morning, so thanks for taking the time to join us. Happy Christmas.
You too, Anne. Thanks a million. Bye now.
Bye. So, Laurence, we'll hand over to you to tell us about your project in South Dublin.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne, and thanks for inviting me to, I just check if I got my screen. Yeah, thanks very much for inviting me to speak today and share our experience in South Dublin, and thanks very much to David for setting the scene for us in terms of the benefits of play. I suppose in the County Council we'd be really looking at children growing up.
Laurence, you're not in slideshow mode.
Okay, apologies.
No problem. The joys of Zoom.
The joys of Zoom. Suddenly I've lost my screen.
Perfect.
How is that now?
Perfect.
That's okay. Sorry about that. So I suppose in the County Council, we're very much interested in the health of children growing up in our communities. So our Playspace program has been aimed directly at meeting the needs of those children. So in 2014, we got the brief to provide playgrounds in communities right across the county. We had very few playgrounds in South Dublin, largely in the centre of our main parks. And we were going to base all of this on public consultation. And I suppose our overall aim was that there would be a safe place to play within 10 minutes walk of any house in the county. And we expected maybe playgrounds like you see there on screen, and we thought the communities would be very excited about this, and we'd be get a very positive reaction. When we started our public consultation, it was at the time of the water protests, and we got a hugely negative reaction when we talked about building play areas in communities. People were very nervous about play. They had very negative associations with playgrounds. There was also a huge lack of appreciation for play. And we were challenged very sternly about our proposals. People said, why is play needed here? Our green space is fine the way it is. You're only going to bring problems to us. There's no problem. You're wasting money that could go on better things. Why not spend the money on something else? So we were faced with a lot of questions, because you can't start a consultation with communities and then not be prepared to listen to them. As much as you believe that play is important, when you go to public consultation and you ask people something, you have to be prepared to listen. So we had to go back to the drawing board and really understand ourselves why we were proposing this. So why is play important? It became very obvious to us quickly when we started looking at the lives of children growing up in urban areas, that there was a problem. In Ireland, we have about a quarter of children overweight or obese, and that tends to be a growing problem. We know that the physical environments in which children grow up have an impact on their health, their enjoyment of childhood, and their development. We know there's a rise in mental health difficulties, children with sensory issues, and it became very important to us, or very obvious to us, that play had a key role in this. patterns of behavior in childhood lead to, different outcomes in for adults. And play environments should encourage children to come and spend more times outside. And we know as well that creating better play environments has benefits more for communities as well as for children. There's lots of people that are socially isolated, whether it be, young families that have moved to an area and maybe the parents don't get to know anyone until their children start school, or it could be grandparents who are looking after young children. And when you have a play area in a community, suddenly there's a place where people will meet each other. So there's great benefits there. So we had to decide how we would provide, to, I suppose, answer the questions of the people in the communities who are worried about vandalism and noise and all of this. So we needed to design play areas which would be vandal resistant, that didn't attract loitering or noise, play areas that encourage the type of movement we knew that children needed. We needed to build playgrounds that were accessible to children with disabilities, play areas that would be acceptable to residents and residents associations. And also we needed to explain to people why play was important. So the first question for us then was, what type of play is actually important? So here's two classic ways that play has been provided. You have your playground on the left, and then for generations previously, maybe people played like the children on the right. So what is actually important in terms of play? Well, what we learned was that for children up to 6, what's very important is socialization, is imaginative play. So this impacts on how our brains are formed, and it influences our later health. So you can see the children there standing on the collection of stones. Now, I don't know what game they're playing there, but anytime if I show that to a first class in a school and ask what game they're playing, every hand in the class goes up and they say they're playing King of the Castle or Troll Under the Bridge or Winner of the Olympics or a million other games. And it doesn't really matter. This is a prop for the imagination where children can make their own games from it. It's very much self-directed play. Children decide it themselves. Equally with the girls playing on the stone on the right, they seem deeply engaged in whatever they're doing. And it really doesn't matter what it is, but it is a prop for the imagination. The next type of play, constructive play. This is very important for children of all age groups, and children learn how the actions they take affect the outcomes, and it's very good for forming brain connections and complex thinking. It has no rules, and it's up to children to do it for their own sake. I suppose this is the outdoor equivalent of maybe how a lot of people play when they're young, turning the chairs over in the living room and put blankets over them and making their own place, and they do it for their own reasons to learn. It's great for creativity, great for problem solving. Risky play had largely been gone from playgrounds. We have developed quite an obsession with safe play and eliminating risk, but it's very important that children learn about their bodies, learn about their strengths, and learn about their limitations through risky play. Leaving children until they're teenagers to start taking risks is not a very good idea. There's lots of problems associated with leaving it till they're teenagers to start this type of behavior. If you look at the picture there, there's one chap who is on his knees. He's thinking about crawling across the log. On the other side, he has a friend who's a bit braver, and maybe he's going to walk across. And the group of lads behind are watching and looking and seeing, figuring all this out. Now, there's huge learning going on in that type of play. And I suppose for generations prior to the current generation of children, this was how people played, how they learned about the world. We tend to, not let children off to mucky places like that, but you can replicate that type of natural experience with play equipment, such as this climbing frame here, where we've it built as a more random type of climbing than your very structured climbing frame. Not all children have access to wild areas and forests, so you have to, in urban areas, be creative with the type of equipment you use. Contact with nature is another hugely important factor for children. An area like these children are playing here provides all the benefits of play. It doesn't have to be play equipment. Children who have regular access to natural places show much better physical and mental health. So one of our things in South Dublin was to have places where children could come in contact with nature. Group play is another important aspect of play. Children, and especially in urban areas, live far more isolated lives now than they would have had in previous generations. It's very important for children to play with their peers, and most of the important childhood play you'll be involved playing with other children rather than going, say, with a parent to a playground. But when we're providing play areas, we need to put things in to encourage group play. So the children who don't necessarily know each other will still play together. So a swing like this that you need a group of people to operate is very good to have in each play area. Children learn about cooperation, they learn about teamwork, they learn about socialization, and it also aids children in making friends. So again, another piece here, a wobble belt, things that work better when it requires a group to do it are very important to include in a play area. An important factor in South Dublin for us, South Dublin are signatory to the Barcelona Declaration, which means we need to take disability into account in our decision making. So we try to take a universal design approach where we consider disability to be part of everyday life. And we build playgrounds and play spaces in the assumption that there are places for everybody. Rather than building special provision for children with disabilities, or we try to build places that everybody can play in together. Now we do have public playgrounds without trained staff, so we can't use all of the equipment that's out there, but you know, some equipment requires staff. But I'll show you a range of the type of inclusive play spaces we have in a minute. So just to go back, our design approach in South Dublin is to build settings for play rather than concentrating purely on equipment. We emphasize natural play spaces that focus on the types of things most important to young children, so social play, imaginative play, constructive play. All of our areas we aim to be as inclusive as possible. We try very hard to add to the attractiveness of the areas. That's very important for residents. If you're bringing a play area into a place they live, that it's attractive. And we also try and avoid plastics or materials harmful to the environment. And if possible, we would try to use local materials to build our play spaces. Rather than playgrounds had gone very much to be rubber and plastic and glues, and we found there was no real need for it. So factors affecting accessibility. There are 7 principles of universal design which we send out with any of our play space tenders. I suppose I'll go through some of the issues or some of the learnings we had in South Dublin about accessible playgrounds. I suppose as a starting point, you build playgrounds close to maybe car parks so people can access them easily. You have good paths, you have gates that people can use. You make every area accessible. You don't have ramp, or you don't have steps where it could be a ramp. So basic things like that. When we were consulting with people on accessibility and on playgrounds, we had a few conversations with people who are wheelchair users and very few with about children who are wheelchair users. by and large, we were, but you know, you still provide access for wheelchair users. Children also are on crutches from time to time. You would have grandparents who maybe use different forms of mobility. So, you know, having good access is important. The equipment that we provide that is wheelchair accessible. The basket swing is probably our most popular piece of equipment. Basket swings allow children to use the same equipment in the same way as their brothers and sisters, their friends and neighbors. They're universally popular. Sometimes local authorities keep away from them because they do attract teenagers, where you have a gang of teenagers who can sit into it together and have fun. We would advise in South Dublin that you just get a really robust one rather than not putting it in the first place. You can buy them with chains rather than ropes. You can put them in the most highly visible areas so that if there is anybody there at night, they can be seen. It's not a hiding place, but it's a very good piece of equipment. We use trampolines in a lot of our parks. Again, children of different abilities can all use them together. And you have various different types of them depending on, you know, a lot of the motorized chairs are very heavy, so it can be difficult for them to get on and off the regular trampoline. So, you know, we have different ones like this one here with more of a belt mechanism, which is easier to use, but a really great piece of equipment. Roundabouts are another piece of equipment we use. Again, great for group play, great for cooperation. And you can get ones like this that require low physical effort. So maybe some children mightn't have great strength in their arms or different things like that. So you get one that is very easy for children to use. That's not, the older ones used to be very, very heavy. There's a whole range of seats that you can get for children of different abilities. This is a couple of them here. We find double width slides. Again, this allows a parent or a carer to go down the slide with the child. So you put the child on your knee and go down. It's where that mightn't be possible if you just had a single width slide. But moving beyond equipment. In our play areas, we don't concentrate on equipment. We concentrate on the setting for play. So you will see an image here of that is a playground in Lucan. It's full of children, and the only equipment you can see there in the background is some swings. And even though the playground looks relatively full, there are still some swings that nobody's sitting on. So this is a really good setting for play where the equipment is not the dominant factor. Sorry there again. Just to mention as well, in our consultations in communities right across the county, I spoke to thousands of people about play of all age groups. A handful of those conversations were about children who are wheelchair users. But by and large, the main conversations I had about disability or accessibility was about autism. So, yeah, everybody recognizes the value of play for children with autism, but there can be a huge fear from parents around bringing their children to public playgrounds and how their child's behavior will be perceived, or how the negative consequences will affect them or will affect other people, and very much a fear about how other parents will perceive their child. So this is a major issue. We're very lucky in South Dublin. We had a sports and disability officer, Anya Buggy, who provided us with a huge amount of insight when designing play spaces for children with autism. So I am definitely not claiming to be any type of expert on autism, but what I needed to understand in terms of setting out a program of building play spaces were that it is actually fairly common. About 1 in 150 kids in Ireland would have ASD. They maybe have a weakness in communication, social interaction, or initiating play. There are repetitive behaviors, there can be sensory issues, and there's a tendency that the child can become overly stressed, fearful, or nervous. So we had to take this into account. So the big question was, how do we design the play spaces, or how can the design of play spaces have an impact on the experiences of children and their families? The important requirement for children with ASD, contact with nature, everything I read pointed towards that is hugely beneficial for children with autism to have contact with nature. Rules of a playground may exclude some children, so we try and get rid of as many rules as possible. So pieces of equipment that can only be used one way would be a lot less attractive to us than a piece of equipment that can be used in a variety of ways. The layout of the playground, some children will really desire to play in full sunshine or may need to be in shade. Children may require hidden places to retire out of the full gaze of observers. So your traditional playground with a metal fence around the outside where they'd have to stand with their back to it is not really suitable. Children may get very stressed in those areas. So having quieter areas or hidden areas will allow maybe a child with autism to stay in the playground. And sensory rich environments and sensory stimulation are very important as well. So I'm going to take you through a few examples in South Dublin that we developed. This first example, this is the playground in Timon Park. We opened, you had to cross a river to get to it. A lot of people thought we were mad. A lot of people said they would never bring their children to a play area like that. And the first group that we noticed coming there regularly were children with grandparents, because grandparents played crossing stepping stones, played with water when they were young, and understood innately the benefits of this type of play. This next one is a play space, again in Tala. It is very simply 2 wooden tables that we placed in a woodland. And it is amazing to see how it has been used. So first of all, you have the benefit of the natural surroundings, but simply by placing those tables there, children come in and it sparked creativity. It encourages language development. This group of children did not know each other. One of these is my daughter Rosie, but they immediately started this game where they were in a restaurant and they all joined this imaginary game. There are children, there are boys and girls, they're of different ages. So these tables have become restaurants, theatres, schools, hospitals, morgues, fire stations. They've been buses and a wide array of other things. So it's really a prop for the imagination. You can see here they were cooking a ham in this picture, and they were hugely engaged in it. For children who didn't know each other, the little girl there was Polish. She didn't speak English, but she was hugely involved in the game. So you can see how for a child with language difficulties, that engaging in a type of play like this would be hugely beneficial and help in the development of communication skills. A Hermitage play space in Lucan. Again, the access to nature. We had planted wildflowers, and in choosing an area to put a play area, look for an area that already has trees or wildflowers. And sometimes the play area can be built by simply clearing out maybe a little bit of the undergrowth, put in an accessible path, and that shows people this is a safe place to play. Parents will let their children go and play there. Here is a playground in Timon Park, and you can really see how we do our mix of equipment and natural areas. So we leave all the thistles, all the nettles. We allow the messy side of nature to stay. Again, to access this playground, you go over stepping stones or you can climb over a bridge. But nature by its design is messy, and children do not need it tidied up. And by presenting play spaces like this, we're sending out the message that it is okay to play in natural places. We're breaking down the conventions on how children play. So there's less rules and trying to make it a less stressful place. We find in this play area often children run off into the woods and come back with sticks, and these huge games evolve in this play space that has nothing to do with any of the equipment that we've provided there. We've provided a setting. Parents realize it's a play area, and what happens is parents go and sit on the grass and play. Children spend many hours in this play area versus the 15 or 20-minute visits they used to have to our conventional playgrounds. And play happens here at a much slower, more relaxed place. It's a very stress-free environment. And I suppose this was the type of play experience that previous generations had before playgrounds and play equipment became a thing. On sensory play equipment, this is our giant, this playground is based around the story of the Irish Fina, the brown bull of Cooley. So he's sitting there in the middle of this fort. We find that we positioned him in a shady place because we knew that it would be important for some children to have access to shady areas. But as well as being important for imaginary play, we find many adults and children really enjoy sitting on this bull for long periods and feeling the timber and feeling the heat of him at different times of the year, or how cold he is, and it provides this huge sensory experience. And this is not an experience that is solely for children with autism or with sensory needs. When we build our inclusive playgrounds, everybody benefits from these type of things. So again, you'll see our bull in more close up here. So another sensory play area, this is in the same playground. We have some pigs in a mud pit. And this area was designed by a local special needs school, St. Joseph's Special Needs School in Tala. And it features a family of pigs who, the design was, they say, a family of pigs who you can play with if you want. So the area is muddy, it has 3 pigs in it, and you can jump around in the mud if you want, or you can just watch the pigs. So again, mud is a really great sensory play experience, really loved by the younger ones. Some parents might hate us for putting in play areas like this, but they, people often come and tell me stories of play experiences they had from 50 or 60 years ago involving muddy areas or having wellies stuck in the mud that are still vivid after all of that time. So, this type of thing, even though it's not generally done in urban areas, has huge benefits for children. Shady places and places to retreat. Here is a play tunnel made from willow. We put these into a lot of our playgrounds. They are great for imaginary play, but again, having these shady places to retire to is very important. It takes the stress out of play spaces for so many children. Here's another playground we did. This one is in Lucan. It was in an area that needed to be drained anyway, so we built a dry riverbed. And the entire play area is just comprised of sand, grit, paths, planting, and long grass. But those simple materials, it still makes a very sensory rich environment. The long grass, we'll have children who will sit there and pull the seed heads off the long grass and really engage in this type of intimate play experience. They walk up and down through it, dragging their feet, listening to the natural sounds, listening to the crunch. Again, something like this is produced for a fraction of the cost of playground equipment, but having these wild places are important for children. We've done an awful lot of planting there, so eventually a lot of this will be grown up over and it'll make hiding places. You can see there's a bridge there in the background. We put that in so that the area would be accessible to children in wheelchairs. But actually, as a consequence of that, it has created so many games where they jump off the bridge or run from one bridge to the other or dig tunnels under the bridge. So there's a feature we put in to aid accessibility, which has also hugely aided the play experience. This is another playground in Lucan. And you'll see here is a feature of a lot of our playgrounds. All of our main areas of activity, we surround them with mounds. So as well as reducing the need to put edging to keep sand in a sand pit or wood chip in, it allows children to sit back and observe the play and decide whether they want to join in or not. So if you're not comfortable, if you have to stand with your back to a fence, that's not a comfortable position for children. But if you can stand on a hill and watch what's happening in front of you and decide, well, that boy looks friendly, or I might go and play beside that girl over there. Again, that reduces stress and makes it more comfortable for children. And again, this is not just children with autism. All children can experience shyness or nervousness in play areas. So having places like that really make it more comfortable. It also makes it more comfortable, rather than the parent following around the child constantly, that they can stand back, maybe read their book or whatever, and observe the children from a distance. That is a lot more difficult to do in your traditional playground, where there's one metal bench, and you know, if someone's sitting on it, you mightn't feel comfortable sitting beside them, and you would end up cutting the playground visit much shorter than if you have a relaxing, comfortable place to spend while your child plays. We have hidden features in a lot of our playgrounds. Again, to make life easier for a lot of children with autism. We had been told on a number of occasions about a problem that exists with slides, that often a child would go to the top of the slide because it is the highest place in a playground, and they would simply just like to stand there, and they might notice a queue building up behind them. But you'd have a parent who's watching, who's thinking, there's going to be trouble, they're not going to move. You might have another parent saying, that child is naughty, they won't take their turn. They don't know maybe that the child has autism. So what we do is we often put the highest point in a playground at something such as this, a tree trunk. And nobody's going to come and say, excuse me, your child has been standing on that log for 5 minutes, it's my child's turn. But this is an important experience for some children, and by putting in features like this, it is allowing them to experience it. It also allows any other child who just wants to climb up, jump, experience to do so as well. So here we have another one in the same playground. Encouraging social interaction is another feature of playgrounds. So here's a very simple shop that we set up. The little girl who's playing shopkeeper, she was a day we took this photograph, she was Polish, she didn't have English, and yet these children formed this game of selling little pieces of stone for pieces of grass, and they had this whole interaction going on without language. So this is a way of encouraging social interaction, encouraging these important types of connections between children that don't happen, for instance, if you're sitting on a swing next to somebody who's swinging. Again, here's another playground in, I think this is Perrystown. And you can see again how we've built the playground in an area that had shade, because this can be very important for people. So built the playground under the tree. You can see how we've again used the mounding, so you can sit back and decide whether you want to join in the game or not. And again, we've used natural materials on all of this. This is in the west of the county in Lucan. This is a very natural park, Lucan Domain, and we considered that building a playground there would be out of context with the natural setting. So what we decided to do was to put in features that drew children's attention to the natural world around them. So the first picture there, you have a sycamore seed, It's beside the largest sycamore tree we have in the county, and we thought this feature, children generally like things that are out of scale with themselves, so they tend to like daisies, which are particularly small flowers, or sunflowers, which are particularly big. So we're playing with the idea of scale here, so we have put in a lot of sculptural elements which draw the attention. So the sycamore tree or the oak tree, or some of the mushrooms from the rotted trees that are left in the park. We also built this gateway at an orchard. While our staff were building this, we had a lot of negative comments from people. Oh, this is a complete waste. But it's regular that we'd now pass that, where you'd see even elderly people standing at the gate, leaning on the gate, having a chat to one another. So it encourages social interaction, it encourages climbing, it encourages movement. This area in Avonbeg and Tala was an area that there was lots of social problems in this area. We regularly had, you know, joyriding, and use of a child had been killed there on a motorbike the previous year. And everybody said anything we put in there would get destroyed with vandalism. We had a really good consultation with a local group of teenagers who designed the playground based on the prehistory of the area and these ancient stone circles. But we built a playground also which is very difficult to vandalize. There's very little you can do to any of those rocks. There's very little you can do to some sand. We put in very few pieces of equipment, but this is beside a school. And what happened in the school was every morning the bell now has to go in the playground to tell people to go into the schoolyard. We can, in this one site alone, measure hundreds and hundreds of hours of play and exercise happening in an area that was a really poorly used open space. It's a huge amenity to the school to have this there, and if you saw all the exercise happening, it has also made people who live in this area particularly proud of where they live, and they don't accept the type of behavior that had happened previously. Some people said they were embarrassed if a work colleague came to pick them up, or people saw where they lived, they drove into where they lived and they saw a burnt out car or something like that. That doesn't happen anymore. It has really increased people's appreciation of the place they live in, and it has a really positive effect on how the area is treated. Again, this is Willsbrook Park in Lucan. It shows a mix of equipment and natural play features. These climbing logs are really popular, especially with older children who want a bit more risk from their play. And even with teenagers, we often go in and you'll find, you know, 5 or 6 teenage girls sitting up on the top having a chat. So it's an important play experience. And again, not using any manufactured equipment or anything damaging to the environment. This is again a typical overview of the type of play areas we have, largely grass. We could probably do with planting more trees in our play areas, but a diverse landscape setting, without the focus being all on the equipment. So interesting topography, hills, grass, trees, sand, wood chip. Sensory play environments. On one of our early playgrounds, I invited boy James Casterly, who's a local celebrity, I suppose, here. He's a wheelchair user, to test some of our playgrounds. And I was quite embarrassed one day when he looked at the sandpit and said, "How am I meant to go in there?" And I hadn't considered how a child in a wheelchair could use the sandpit. So I said, "Look, it's just not finished yet," and quickly went about devising a solution for a child in a wheelchair to access the sandpit. And this is a detail that we use quite a lot. The tables you can see there in the background allow a child to come in on the decking, come up to the tables at different heights and start using the sand immediately. You can see most of the children sitting on the sand. That was a really nice day. Most days when you go to this playground, children are in the sand pit. They're using the sand tables rather than sitting in the sand. You will have a lot of parents who would not have let their children play in the sand because their clothes would be covered in sand, but they allow them play at the sand tables. So this is a very good example of how we've done something for a reason of accessibility or disability that has improved the play area for everybody. So I'm coming to an end now. So just again to recap on some of the learnings we have. So improving access for a few has really taught us that you can improve the play experience for everybody. And making some children more comfortable in a play area has led to just way more comfortable play areas generally for us. Our playground visits in the natural play areas can last hours and hours. People can bring a picnic and spend, on a weekend day, you would have people spending 2 and 3 hours in a playground. We still have a lot of playgrounds that are the rubber wood chip with the metal fence, or the rubber surfacing with the metal fence around the outside and the metal benches. And the typical visit to those lasts about 20-30 minutes. And they generally cost a lot more than the type of natural playgrounds we've been building in recent years. I'm going to leave it at that and hand back to Anne, and yeah, hopefully we'll have some questions after that. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Laurence. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing your experience and your expertise with us. I think you're really forcing us to rethink how we provide playgrounds. It seems obvious, looking at what you've done there, that the way we've gone with our very manufactured playgrounds with hard surfaces, hard fencing, very bright manufactured equipment, the hard seating, it just doesn't offer the same richness of experience for either children or parents. As a parent, I was imagining myself sitting on one of those grassy mounds and watching children play in those soft areas and climb those tree trunks. And for me, that seemed like a much better experience than this experience I had when my child was young, of watching him in these hard areas surrounded by hard car parks. So I'm delighted that you're starting to get us thinking about how to do this differently. There's been lots of questions and lots of interest in what you've had to say. So Sarah's been keeping an eye on the questions there, so I'll hand over to her to ask you what has come up.
Laurence, thank you very much for your presentation. The first question that came through was, have you any issues with insurance and risky play?
No. We have no issues with insurance, and I think even Europe-wide you will find that there are generally less accidents in natural play areas over areas with equipment. So the main accidents that happen in playgrounds, or the main ones that where the playground designer would have liability, are around moving parts. So a big accident is a small child jumps off a swing and doesn't realize the swing is going to go back and come back and hit them in the head, or it'll be a moving roundabout. So it is equipment that leads to most of the accidents. With natural play, there's, and it's observable in every time you go and see where we have logs or rocks or something like that. Children learn about risk themselves. They don't climb to the top of the rock unless they're comfortable doing it. Whereas in a playground, they will go on the monkey bars higher than they're really physically capable of, or they will climb something that maybe they don't have the climbing skills to be at that height. With natural play, children are much more cautious, and where we put in those big tree trunks, you will find a 5-year-old, he's in low down part of the tree trunk and he's shouting at his mum or dad, look at me, and they're very happy with that. And then we find the child who's 7 or 8 is going a little bit higher, and maybe you get your 12-year-old who'll go to the top and actually jump off. But children really are good in natural settings at determining risk, and we don't have any issue with insurance. We haven't had any claims from any of our natural playgrounds, and it's the same European play standards apply to natural play as apply to equipment. So no, it hasn't been an issue at all for us.
Okay. In terms of maintenance of the playgrounds, would you have any issues with wood chip or any of the surfaces that are used from those that have to maintain them, timings, costings involved in that?
The big thing with using loose materials such as sand or wood chip is that if you can put them inside these mounded areas, the wood chip is not being spread out all over the place. If you have wood chip on the flat with maybe an edging board around the outside, you tend to get difficulties. You have trip hazards, you have the mulch going everywhere. So it's really how you put the mulch in that's important. We had thought we'd be back into all of these areas, topping them up yearly. We have an awful lot less to do than we thought we were going to have to do. So I would say how you specify the areas where you're using loose fill material is really important.
Okay.
And sorry, I'll just say on sand, it would be my strong advice. We use sand a lot, and it was something that a lot of people thought we would have huge problems with. Sand has been taken out of playgrounds in Ireland for many years. We put in the sand really deep. So we put it in like 500 mils deep. That really, it keeps what happens is then it keeps the sand loose, so it's really good play material. But we saw this summer during the lockdown when people couldn't travel to the beach, when you go into half of these playgrounds around South Dublin, there was dads buried up to their necks, left, right and centre, all over the place. So by learning a few things about the materials you're using, like the depth to put them in at, the drainage, how to enclose them, that's the key to using a lot of these materials. Okay.
And any issues with dog fouling or other dogs being in the play areas, or do you manage that yourselves?
Our play areas, we only fence them where we have sand. So because, you know, generally the rule in play areas is that we don't allow dogs into play areas. You'll have a lot of children who makes them very uncomfortable with the presence of dogs, even dogs on leads, and it is really not fair on so many children. That this should be a playground, should be a place where it is less stressful for them, where they can almost be free and, you know, run around without abandon. So we try to keep dogs out, but where we have sand, we always fence them off. And a lot of it, there's a lot of research across Europe about sand pits, and this whole thing, is it full of cat poo, and do cats always poo in playgrounds? It is not showing up right across Europe that this is a major problem at all. We're not finding it in South Dublin. We're not finding dog poo or cat poo in these materials, but it is something we're very conscious to look out for. Especially at the start, we were a bit paranoid that this could totally change people's idea of, you know, coming and using these playgrounds, but it hasn't been an issue for us.
Okay. And in terms of public consultations, were children, those with additional needs, or older young teenagers involved in the consultation process? And if so, did that influence any design? So there are three groups in that. Sorry, that was quite a loaded question.
Yeah. So first of all, younger children. I might, if it's okay, just share a slide again.
Sure.
Is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
we can see your notes on it. But
okay, sorry.
So maybe if the summary was a little bit bigger, just so the text could be seen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You might have to go back into the normal presentation. Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure what's happening here. So basically, yes, we consulted children. I can't get out now.
No problem. That's okay.
My cursor has gone dead. So we consulted children on all of the play spaces. Now, what we found important, if you chat to children and say, tell me what you want in a playground, or if you chat to people who are 30, or if you chat to people who are 80, everybody comes up with the same list of things because they're thinking of a playground they know, and they tell you what's in it. There's a climbing frame, a swing, everything like that. So for you need to, in consultation, to go at it quite differently. So for children, smaller children, the best thing to do is ask them to draw you a picture of a play area. Say, what is your perfect play area? Can you draw me a picture of that? And what you tend to get is, I'm not sure, can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you tend to get in when you ask children to draw pictures is, the first thing is, I would say over 90% of children start off by drawing grass and drawing a tree, and frequently a rainbow. But these children haven't grown up in playgrounds with grass and trees, but it's still in virtually every picture, this is how they start off. They see themselves outside in nature, not in an area with rubber and plastic and things like that. Now, how do you interpret these drawings? So largely when they're coming up and drawing these amazing tree houses and rainbows and stuff, that is getting at imagination. They want places for their imagination. So you will find up to about 7 or 8, the pictures they draw are imaginative. Once a child is 7 or 8, then, and up to maybe 10 or 12, you start to see a lot more adventurous stuff, monkey bars, climbing frames, things like that. So you get, so that almost fits in with our research on play about what the different age groups need. So what age groups need the adventurous play. The consultation with adults is also really important. If you, again, if you go in and talk about playgrounds, you generally get poor results from your consultations. But if you get a group of adults and sit around a table and say, tell me about how you played as a child. And, you know, or we have consultations where we'd put maybe 4 questions. We'd mix up all the adults at all the different tables, people who were for a playground and against a playground and everything, and say, tell me how you played as a child. People come out and give you all these experiences from 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago of climbing over hedges and playing in tunnels and making up games, or they tell you how when their housing estate was built, there was a heap of sand left over and it was a ramp for their bike, or they dug holes in it, or they buried their figures in it, or a huge range of these experiences. And a lot of these people are telling you about these play experiences. And then when you say to them, now, do your grandchildren have access to somewhere to play like that where they live? And that's what makes them think, okay, maybe the place we live in, our estate, is actually quite sterile and not very good for children. And the fact that they can be brought for 15 minutes to a really safe, sterile playground does not make up for the lack of the type of childhood that they had. So getting that type of thing out of consultation is really good. It's also important, the consultation process for designers. So I might have previously done a design where I had sat down for a couple of hours and with my drawing pens and, you know, worked out a scheme that I thought looked brilliant. But that was really unhelpful as well, because if people were suggesting changes, it was almost like you would sort of take offense that, you know, I've done all this work and what do these people really know? So we started in places maybe using something like, you know, a large sandbox. So you go there and say to the children, okay, tell me You show me how you'd like it designed. And they put loads of mounding around the outside, and they put in trees and everything. And then next you bring in the neighbors, and the neighbor said, that's fine, but they moved the mound from the back of their house over to the middle of the playground. Nobody's going to take offense. You haven't spent hours doing it. It only takes a few minutes to do this type of thing. But you can give the parents, the children, the people who live closest to it, you can engage them all in that. Much easier than you can if you have spent hours and hours drawing, and everybody can see each other's viewpoints. So here's another thing where you sit around with a group of children, and you sort of build it, and you take the children's ideas into account, and you take the neighbors' ideas into account, and they can see whether you're doing it or not. You know, you can't be accused of running a, well, you just consultation where you just did what you wanted anyway. So this is a really good consultation method. So I would recommend that type of method to anybody. Okay.
Thanks, Laurence. Another question was, are there any steps that residents' committees can take to initiate the creation of a natural playground in a local space?
I suppose we had a play program, so we were looking for sites all along. I suppose that really depends on your local authority, but it can start off very small. In some interesting rocks, some tree planting, access to nature. They don't have to be expensive. So I suppose it really depends on each local authority, how they manage their play provision.
Okay. And for the large tree trunks, were they there or did you plant them in? And also, is there any maintenance around them, like treatment of the wood or for slippy surfaces?
No, they were all bought in. Okay. So at this stage, a lot of the playground companies in Ireland would be on the lookout for tree trunks and interesting boulders and interesting natural features, because they know if they're going to tender for some of our works, that these are the type of features that we value. So they will often come with a photograph of, oh, I saw a fallen tree when I was in Kerry over the summer and I bought it, and they'll get it transported up to us when we're building our next one. We get our playgrounds inspected twice yearly, and if there's anything has to be done at that stage, but we haven't had any issues at all with any of the tree trunks, and we don't treat any of them. Okay. They should be, the timber should be seasoned before you put it in, so not a freshly cut tree.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Have school groups been involved in the naming of elements, or members of the community naming parts of the playground? So to kind of, not a sense of ownership, but maybe a belonging towards a particular area of a playground. Are there any named areas?
Not that I'm aware of, but now in saying that, I was at a Playspace recently, and we put in, it was just a large boulder, like a megalith, that was just left near a path in one park, and there was a family having a picnic on it, and they told me that's their picnic stone, and when they go to the park, they go and they call it the picnic stone. I would not be surprised if other people had names for features in their own area. I didn't ever see it as being a picnic area. I saw it maybe as a climbing area. I know a lot of elderly people sit there. It's very popular during the summer because it heats up and it retains the heat. But you know, I wouldn't be surprised if children had their own names on features, but it's not something that I've been involved in naming with children.
Thank you. And my own question, was there any water features ever brought into discussions? I'm thinking that there could be from countries that our climate may not warrant pools or swimming pools are large, but there are people that are listening in from warmer climates. Has water ever been a feature of designs that the children or young adults or adults in the community thought about?
Yeah,
discussed?
we have just finished the refurbishment of possibly our largest playground in Corca Park in Clondalkin. And the most popular feature in that playground is our water play area. We have water play in a lot of playgrounds. We generally started off with some type of water pump. So you need somebody to pump water on one end, and that starts a stream of water then that is either, you know, you have an Archimedes screw, or you have various ways of gathering the water, putting it down chutes, mixing it with sand. We find it really good. Younger children love splashing in the water. We find that in a playground, you will have a 12-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl will play on the exact same thing because they each have a role in the either pumping or opening chutes. We find that children, boys and girls, people of different ages, different abilities, without any encouragement from parents, cooperate, join in the same games, socialize. It's a really strong element, and where we have it, it is always nearly the most popular thing. So typically in a playground, when a child comes into the playground with their parents, they run to the swings, and they could spend sort of 5 minutes on the swings. And then in an area with sand and water, they could spend the entire summer digging a tunnel across the sandpit or bringing water through a chute. Hours and hours and hours of play with little sticks and a little puddle of water and some grass, and this really deep play where you have sand and water for constructed play. So yeah, water, wherever we can get it, I like to get water in.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes our questions and answers, Laurence. So I'll hand you back over to Anne, and thanks for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Laurence. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you for your time and your generosity in sharing the benefit of your experience. I think you've gotten us all thinking about the future of play in our areas. We've had a number of questions about availability of the slides. So I'd just like to say we'll be putting a video of the webinar on our website and on our YouTube channel. And we'll also put links to the presentation itself on our website. And for our European partners, we'll upload the presentation to Basecamp, where we share all of our documents. So thank you very much, Laurence, and thanks, Sarah, for taking the questions there. And happy Christmas to everybody.
Okay, thank you.